Hi everybody, my name is Lydia and I'm course leader for the BTEC Art and Design practice. We do so many different things on the art and design practice, probably about 9 different activities in the first half term, but I'm just going to show you one example of the sort of practical technique you'll do on the course. So this is going to be a small ceramics tester. Here the students are actually doing this at the moment. The students are exploring ceramic material, thinking about the health and safety and the creative properties of this material. So we're going to start with just a small piece of clay. And to begin with, I'm going to roll out a tile. So we use 2 guides and just going to use the guides to make sure my tile isn't too thin. Just going to move the guides away and just roll this down a little bit. So the very first thing I'm going to do is cut that into a sort of neat shape. So I don't need all of the clay, but I might use that scrap actually. So I'm just going to put that to one side and take that down. Just going to take that away. I might just blend that down into the third sample. So initially, I asked the students on the course last week to explore the sort of mark making potential of their tools, because one of the things that is quite important is when you've got clay, you've got quite a plain flat surface, but we are going to want to decorate that as we go. So I asked them to think about the way that the knife itself, you notice I'm just cleaning my knife off every time I make a mark, can make a thin mark or a really, really deep mark. So this is what I'd call a mark making sample. So as we go through, we could take the knife through at an angle. When you do that at an extreme angle, it's really nice. You end up with an almost like a ripped texture down this tile. That could be really useful for us on a large pot that would fill with colour. We could always use that to inscribe writing, or we could draw with different sorts of marks. I'm also going to use the point of the knife there to show that that has got pattern making potential as well, and obviously I can draw within that and I can start to make certain dots. So the first little sample I've done there is a knife making sample. There's one that's been fired. There's another one with a little bit more intricate work, so that's really straightforward. The second one is to start to think about the potential for layering smaller bits of clay. Now I want to roll down some of this clay into a much, much thinner sheet. So I can do this in a plain way, so I get a really slim sheet onto the paper so I can peel it off. What I'm going to do is just tear this into really thin strips. I can bend that into little shapes and blend it down back onto the clay. We're doing a project called Seed at the moment on the BTEC, so we've been looking at the way that these seeds have protective shells and sometimes really thin layers to help them fly around more easily, to help the sort of germination process. So as I go down, I'm just trying to vary the way that that has a shape. I'm covering up every single join with the last mark. So I'm just going to carry on taking those down. Another thing I could do as I go down is take some of this clay, and instead of rolling it on the plain clay, I could roll it on some old wallpaper. And you can see there how that starts to take up some of the properties of the wallpaper. So this becomes even more interesting potentially. And I've got there, so you can see that's building up really nicely, really 3-dimensionally. And I also showed the students this week how to make spikes. So we were just rolling those on the desk because some seeds have got really protective spikes, things that will see off predators. So we can build those into the design as we go. You notice we're using all this scrap material. Clay's really, really effective. We can recycle some of this material as well. And then I'm going to go over the top of that and just build that in. Just use that last little bit to create an interesting section at the bottom. So that little sample there looks a bit scruffy, so I'm just going to take that edge off, make that neat and tidy, and that's my second sample. I'll put that there. You can see that's quite a lot different to the last one. Here's an example of one that's been fired, and there's another one which is very similar but just a little bit smaller, just to show you that they do vary. The last one, I'm going to use some pre-prepared moulds. So these are what we call press mould. It's basically a large, thick tile like this, but we've pressed into it things like shells, scallop shells, shells with a twist in, some little cockle shells and things like that. So I'm going to use that on this sample here. So what I'm doing is pressing the clay into the mould, and you can see there that's giving me an impression of the little objects in there. And then in a second I'm going to start layering those again onto the clay. So they're all little tiny, I think I'm going to put the biggest one at the top, little tiny perfect moulds of shells and things that we've got in college and we've made a little mould of. So I'm just going to bring those down onto the tile. They look really nice all together and give us something slightly different. So we've created another surface, just going to trim that down again to make it look neater. Even just neatening one side looks better than leaving everything sort of scruffy on every side. And pop that down there next to our other sample. So I've got one I made earlier there. So you can see again, each little mould gives you a different impression. So after that, what you want to really think about there is, what could I do with those surface samples? So I'm just going to do one very quick example just to show you. We've been experimenting with pinch pot shapes. I've got two here, so just show you how we've made those. So if I start with the spikes this time, just going to try and very quickly blend these onto the top of this mould, this press mould. So I'm just building up the spikes to make an interesting surface at the top. I'm doing those first because if I started to try and put them in later, they'd be really difficult to fit in. Then I'm going to roll out some of the clay into the flat shapes that we were using before to wrap. So you can see I'm just going to sort of tuck those in. You'll notice that I'm not really kneading that much. I'm just kind of working with it, trying to touch it as little as possible because I want to get all of those edges really nice and neatly. And wrapping that around again. So the more little wraps I get on this form, the nicer it would be. I'm just going to add a little tiny press mould to that as well. So I might bring that in around the edge just to give me, it's almost like a little sea urchin's grown on this little sea form or something. And then finally, I would say that that's already starting to look quite interesting. So you can see there, each one of those is slightly different. This one has some press molds and is wrapped. This one is more intricately wrapped than the one I was just working on there. And this one has the sort of combination of the two techniques. So we've been doing these small samples this week in BTEC, but we have the overall project is based on a notional client base for the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So we're going to be completing designs and scaling these up. So we're going to have a slightly larger scale model, and students are all really excited about getting those finished. Thanks very much.